Hi everyone, thank you for joining us today. My name is Rosemary Cruz and I'm a data scientist at RGA, and today we're going to be talking about how to obtain real results in your predictive models. Brian Wonzik enjoyed many years as a prominent food scientist in the US, publishing hundreds of research studies, wrote best-selling books, and even served in the US Department of Agriculture, where he helped shape the nation's dietary guidelines. His research into eating habits and their effects on health gained widespread acceptance. A very popular example being his examination into the relationship between overeating and large plate sizes. Unfortunately, last year, Cornell University announced Wonzik's resignation after finding that he had committed academic misconduct in his research, including misreporting of research data. Wonzik's case received a lot of media attention, but almost entirely due to his prominent position, not because his misreporting was really in any way unique. Similar instances of faulty data manipulation are widespread in academic circles. The process generally involves collecting data, selecting data for statistical analyses until favorable results are obtained. Researchers under pressure to publish often misinterpret data, whether intentionally or not, to produce desired outcomes. The insurance industry has a lot to learn from academia's missteps. With predictive analytics and data science assuming ever-expanding roles in insurance risk modeling, carriers would be well served to establish best practices that mitigate the creation of faulty models. Overfitting, the process of deriving overly optimistic models based on characteristics of the data in front of you, is of particular concern for insurers. Overfitted models will typically pick up more of the noise in your current data set instead of actual underlying patterns that exist in the real world, which thus fails to provide accurate predictions or even useful insights. Generally, overfitting occurs due to analyst oversight in two key areas. The first being researcher degrees of freedom. This is also known as procedural overfitting, data dredging, or p-hacking, depending on the specific academic circle. And then the second area of concern is when you ask too much from the data, and this really relates to model complexity. So the first concept we're going to talk about is researcher degrees of freedom. The concept really means that it's how many choices that are available to analysts that produce results which cannot be replicated. So prominent examples like Brian Wonzik's are bringing more attention to the replication crisis affecting a range of disciplines, which include food science, which we talked about a little bit earlier, psychology, cancer research, and many others. The ability to replicate previous results is a critical component of the scientific process. So why do so many research studies fail to replicate? A variety of factors can contribute to drawing statistical significance from insignificant data, and some of those examples include combining and comparing conditions in an ad hoc way, excluding data arbitrarily, and controlling for different predictors. Essentially, with all of the choices to be made in a given analysis, employing proven strategies can help produce sound results that are more likely to be reproduced in the future. Example number 1. Make research design decisions before analyzing the data. So this specific piece of example relates to starting with identifying a clear question to answer or problem to solve, outlining data subsets to focus on, potential predictors of interest, and methods to use in selecting a model is what then follows. While it might be impossible to anticipate all of the issues that can arise unexpectedly in your data, the more decisions you make upfront, the less likely the chances of making arbitrary choices based on the data at hand. Example 2. Where applicable, use subject matter knowledge to inform your data aggregation. So the process of selecting, grouping, comparing data does not need to start from scratch. Instead, you should rely on previous research and industry best practices regarding data manipulation to inform decisions that can help produce replicable results. Example 3. Limit the exclusions of data. So while identifying and removing data entry errors is clearly important, this should only happen with absolute certainty that such data points are erroneous. Spending the time to develop a true understanding of the data generating process can help limit arbitrary exclusions. So the next area where overfitting is likely to occur is when you're asking too much from the data. So sometimes simple models will outperform very complex ones in predictive analytics. Really, for any given data set, the number of observations available to you allows for a certain maximum level of model complexity, which above that, your model no longer performs as good as it can. When simpler models produce improved predictions over a more complex model, this means that overfitting has likely occurred. In this simulated example, 20 data points are drawn from the same distribution. So the x-axis represents the average number of miles walked a week, and the y-axis represents life expectancy. Remember, this is just an example, and none of the relationships that you're seeing are actual real examples, and so just remember to keep that in mind. The two models that you see are relating life expectancy as a function of weekly number of miles walked, and those are plotted in the figures. There's a simple model, and the equation is below. It's estimated on the 20 data points, and it's represented by the blue line, while a more complex model with the formula below is estimated on the same points and is represented with a red line. So taking a quick look, you can clearly see that the complex model does a better job of fitting the data set in front of you, and in fact it does. So you can quickly take a look at that by seeing that the error in the simple model is around 8, compared to the complex model, which has an error of about 3. However, this example is using the same data set that was used to build the models, a practice that is well to lead to an overestimation of performance. In the next figure we're now seeing both models estimated once more, but this time on a new data set, with new 20 points generated from that same distribution. We're now doing the same thing, we're calculating the error and comparing across models. Looking at both models on the new data set leads to different conclusion. The complex model no longer appears to predict the data points as well as it did on the previous set, and in fact it doesn't. The simple model's error is at around 8, and now the complex model's error has increased to 17. This example shows why it's essential to select candidate models based on your out-of-sample performance and not using the same data set that was used to build the models. As a substitute for new data, certain statistical techniques can be used to estimate out-of-sample performance without actually having to go out in the real world and capture more data, because typically we can't do that. Some of these techniques include using holdout sets, cross-validation, AIC, BAIC, and bootstrapping. Please remember that the goal is to determine which model gets us closer to learning about future outcomes and not historical data. So to conclude, we need to understand that with increasing computing power, we're now allowing analysts to manipulate data and build models from both small and large data sets more quickly and more effectively than ever before. Yet these enhanced capabilities also comes a greater number of choices and greater exposure to building models that will overfit the data. Tasked with determining an applicant's mortality risk years into the future, life insurers must be acutely aware of the potential pitfalls of overfitting. They must take steps to accurately validate every predictive model they develop and work continuously to update and improve models as new forms of data become available. With that, I hope you found this informative. We thank you very much for your time.